Jung, the archetype of the self, individuation, and alchemy, a topic requested by quite a few people. What we want to know, and we need to know, and we must know, and I must say this, is that Carl Jung is the father of analytical psychology. And he laid the foundation for future standards and teachings in the realm of psychology, therapeutic practices, and even in personal and spiritual growth approaches. Carl Jung provided the most comprehensive understanding of the self and healing and individuation because he addressed the fundamental human needs, that of integrating all the layers of the self and healing. While modern therapeutic approaches have diversified, it's essential to recognize that the therapeutic intervention is truly comprehensive and is completed only when it arrives to the self and begins individuation, otherwise known as very deep healing. And individuation is the quest to wholeness. Often, Carl Jung's work is described as the most profound work because it delves into the intricate layers of the self, thus it facilitates the journey towards wholeness and profound healing. So let's look at a few archetypes. What are archetypes? Now, the word archetypes comes from the Greek word archetypos, which means first imprint. And Plato, the Greek philosopher, is the first who brought forth the archetypes in his theory of forms. Now, an archetype can be an apple, for example, can be described as round, red, and firm. So roundness, redness, and firmness are archetype. And the Platonic solids you see on the screen are called Platonic, named after Plato. So that's what an archetype begins to look like, and then it gets very complex. Now, Carl Jung's perspective on the power of the archetypes that Carl Jung brought to us is that the archetypes are, when it comes to experiences, when it comes to archetype of the self and collective unconscious, is that archetypes are patterns that are formed by permanent deposits that have been constantly repeated for many generations. And these are memories and patterns of human experiences. Now, apples are all kinds of different types of apples. We have archetypes within apples. So we have archetypes of human experiences. These archetypes, they stimulate or trigger these imprints in all of us, with all of us. And archetypes are very powerful, and they are universal because they influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions. These archetypes influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, our behavior. Now, some of the common archetypes, let me see if I switch this to this. Let me try to see if I switch. How do I switch this? Okay, I'm going back to this. Okay, some of the common archetypes, well known, are the hero, the shadow, the elder, or the wise elder, mother, father, lover, innocent, seeker, rebel, alchemist, so on and so on. There are many, many archetypes. I have a list of 320 archetypes based on Carl Jung's work, and it's not the complete list. Archetypes begin to evolve, especially with the evolution of technology. Now, we want to know that every individual embodies multiple archetypes at different stages in their lives or in different situations. Complete archetypes or partial archetypes, it really doesn't matter. But as humans, we are not just one archetype. And as we embody this, we channel experiences and certain emotions. And it's important to know, because once we know those things, we can then choose to embody maybe a different type of archetypes by choice. Yeah, instead of reacting, we can respond, and we have ways to respond as opposed to react, because there's so many archetypes. And all of these archetypes, when we embody this, they result in a recognizable pattern of behavior. And this recognizable patterns of behavior, they have a certain probable outcome. Mm-hmm. And humanity's behavior is understood and enhanced, modified, directed. Many verbs come into play because of the archetypes. For example, in the United States, when the interest rates go down, that influences more purchase behavior, which aids in the economic growth. If we want to slow down the amount of purchase, then interest rates go up. So this is one way to understand how certain archetypes influence and model human behavior. Carl Jung's work on the self is probably one of the most profound work, because he has addressed all of the layers of the self that need to be taken in consideration when healing is approached. Now, Carl Jung, as I said before, is the father of analytical psychology, and anybody in the creative purpose of analysis can be creative. It's not just logical. Yeah, any analyst will delve deeper and deeper into what's available, into what they are looking at. So according to Carl Jung, in the simplicity of all of the complexity, the self has their four main aspects of the self: persona, shadow, anima animus, and individuation. Now, persona represents is how we present ourselves to the world, and represents all of the different social masks, so to speak, that we wear. You can think of the persona as the clothes you wear. You wear certain clothes when you go to work, certain clothes when you go to sleep, certain clothes when you go to different events. So is our persona. Our persona changes. We embody different persona when we are at home, at work, in groups, different situation, and so on. And the persona is very important, and it acts to shield the ego from negative images. And I'm probably going to come back to this. A lot of therapeutic interventions and personal development seeks to address the persona, which is not sufficient, according to Carl's Jung archetype of the self. If we don't address all of the four aspects of the self, only working on the persona, we have more work to do. The anima animus represents the soul and the sacred. Anima is the feminine image in the male psyche, and animus is the male image in the female psyche. We all possess anima and animus, regardless of our gender. We have masculine type of behavior, thoughts and behavior, and then we have feminine type of thoughts, feelings, and behavior, regardless of our gender. And the animus represents the true self rather than the image we present ourselves to others. And it takes intentional work to arrive and to allow the anima animus to flourish and nurture our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Because when we don't allow that, our experience of life, it's not full. We just address the persona and address the expectations of others that they have over our few different persona archetypes that we embody or we have to embody throughout on a daily basis. Anima animus, which is the truest layers of the self, is the primary source of communication with the soul through the sacred. Developing the anima animus and getting into the layers of the self and the sacred through techniques of the sacred, it's one of the most beautiful work that we can do in our lifetime. It's deep and it's beautiful and it's joyful and it's wholesome. It's very, very wholesome. On the shadow, there's a lot of people that talk about the shadow, and I often notice therapists pointing to other therapists, their shadow. Yeah. Very few people talk about their own shadow. They just see somebody else's shadow. Now, Carl Jung calls the shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be. No wish to be. I'm clicking on some things here. The shadow as the thing a person has no. All right. And the shadow is the part of the unconscious mind that is composed of repressed ideas, weaknesses, desires, lust, instincts, shortcomings. Pretty much that dreaded self as defined by William James, the father of functional psychology. You could look at the dreaded self as the shadow. And also represents the darker side of the psyche. It represents all kinds of wildness, impulses, chaos, unknown. And most people, unless people head into the journey of transformational journey of individuation, healing, individuation, personal growth, development, many terminologies, many different words and terminologies can be attributed to this one journey towards wholeness, as Carl Jung calls it, individuation. Many people deny this aspect of the self, the shadow. And instead they project the shadow onto others. And this causes the most difficult part in a relationship. If all relationships, not just couples, a relationship, if we were to acknowledge our shadow for what it is and have an intention to work to bring it to light. That's why it's called shadow, because you got to bring it to light. Yeah. Also bringing something to light. It's also known as making it conscious, also known as information, right? If it's in shadow, it's behind you, you don't know about it, you have no information about it, you don't have information about what are the aspects of your shadow that you could bring into light slowly. I mean, we don't have to, I don't think we can work the shadow over one day or one therapeutic session or 2 or 3 or 5, right? It takes a little bit of work, and all of this work can be very, very, very pleasant and very, very fulfilling if it's done right. But what I encourage everybody to do is to stop pointing everybody else's shadow, because you're not necessarily, you don't exactly know that this is their shadow. I've been in situation where therapists pointed to another therapist, their shadow, somebody else's shadow. And actually, in many instances, somebody were just presented their standards. They weren't talking about the shadow, they weren't projecting anything onto others, they just presented their shadows. And other people assumed that they were reacting based on their shadow. So when you react, you could think of it as it is your shadow that has you react towards something, towards an event, right? Projecting our shortcomings onto other, it's complicated, and I would say it would take at least 50%, if not 70%, of psychotherapeutic intervention. So we stop projecting onto others. Yeah. When you have a balanced relationship, when you have a successful relationship, doesn't matter whether it is at work or at home, or it really doesn't matter. It is when you do not project onto others. And when you have a highly dissatisfactory relationship and you just don't want to be around those people, it's when you are projected upon. And some people can hear your message when you say that I'm being projected upon. Well, that's the correct way to say it, instead of saying you project your shadow onto me. No. You can say I am being projected upon. Some people can hear it, but most people cannot hear that. They will refuse to acknowledge that their projection comes from their own shadow. So it takes a good amount of therapy, personal growth, spiritual growth, work on yourself, whatever the terminology is. It takes a good amount of working on yourself, of bringing the unconscious into conscious, to be aware of when you are projecting. It's not about you recognizing when somebody projects on you, because it's so much you can do about it. But when you recognize that you project on somebody else, then you have control over it. And you can begin to project a little less and eventually not at all. Well, it is possible. So here's more explanation of the shadow, which we'll cover a little later. But individuation represents the quest for wholeness. And it requires you to become whole, become conscious. And when you begin your individuation, you realize that there is no better than. Carl Jung might be one of the first to state, when it comes to the self, there is no better than. When you feel and when you believe that you are better than somebody else as a human being, you're very much in your shadow, you're very much in your ego, you're very much into a particular persona that you're embodying at that moment. So being better than at the human level, at the level of the self, only exists in your imagination and in your shadow. Now, individuation, it's not as well known that in order to individuate, in addition to working with the shadow, you have to eliminate the ugliest of the ugliest archetype of the human behavior, which is the inner drama triangle of the perpetrator, victim, and rescuer. We all, every single one of us, has this inner drama triangle. Now, psychotherapy seeks to help the victim and the perpetrator refrain for heal, begin to individuate. So there is a perpetrator and there is a victim, and then the psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, or all therapists, they come in as a rescuer to help heal the client, right? I mean, so does all the doctors, all the rescuers, firefighters, police officer, good Samaritans, and so on. But we all have an inner drama triangle: perpetrator, victim, rescuer. It's complex. And this inner triangle leads us to the passive-aggressive behavior. This passive-aggressive behavior is a typical behavior of the shadow. So when we engage in a passive-aggressive behavior, we are embodying, we're behaving from the shadow. And this keeps us from arriving at the self. And the authentic self, you hear me talk about the authentic self, you hear others talk about the authentic self. The authentic self, to my understanding, to what I teach on authentic self, seeks individuation and arriving to the self, addressing all the layers of the self. Now, alchemizing experiences, through alchemizing experiences, we get to better individuate and arrive to the wholeness. Now, what is alchemy? Alchemy is not just turning lead into gold. Alchemy is the process of taking something ordinary and transforming it into something extraordinary. So when it comes to experiences and to thought, feelings, behavior, we're going to turn the lead of the unconscious into the gold of the conscious. Shadow pretty much sits into the unconscious, which is the lead. So as we work the shadow and we proceed with individuation, we're going to alchemize our experiences. Now, alchemizing experiences is what feelfulness provides. Feel a feeling by choice. And this is a bit advanced, but it's very easy to do once we understand thoughts and feelings, um, how we can bridge the thoughts and feelings consciously because they're never separate, and to understand the difference between the emotions and the feelings and our response, um, as opposed to our reaction. Now, alchemy um, is crucial to Carl Jung research in psychology. Without alchemy, Carl Jung teaching and work wouldn't be as it is. Um, in addition, Mircea Eliade states that alchemy is a form of technique of the sacred. Yeah? It's not religious. It's not religion. And this techniques of the sacred allows the alchemist to access the spiritual realm, anima animus, and to communicate with the divine. This is the anima animus as presented in the archetypes of the self by Carl Jung. Yeah. Spiritual realm is not something out there that is unreachable. It's not something outside of us. Spiritual realm is pretty much inside of us. We all have a spiritual realm. It's something that sits very deeply at a deeper layer of the self. And often Jungian work and shadow work and is referred to as very deep work. Well, I don't know if it's deep. I mean, to some perspective, it's deep, but for me, it's most liberating and uplifting type of a work. So depends on what perspective you looking from. So now let's look at some of the common archetypes and their shadow, so we can better understand what a shadow is. Now, what your individual shadows are made of from is not going to be covered on this presentation right now. But you are going to understand a little bit of what the shadow are from a few common archetypes. Warrior. The warrior it's a very important archetype. We all embody this archetype more or less, more often or more seldom, depends. And the warrior represents courage, strength, the willingness to protect and fight for what is right. It's also a warrior is assertive, is disciplined, and is dedicated to their values and to their principles. They utilize their strengths to defend the weak, to uphold justice, and confront challenges with bravery and resilience. So, sounds pretty good, doesn't it? The warrior. We all behave, we all embody the warrior often throughout our life. The shadow parts, now let me backtrack a little bit. The triangle is a very basic form of an archetype. An archetype can get as complex as all of this platonic solids that I showed you earlier. But the triangle is the most basic form of an archetype. Now, the shadow of a warrior comes into the form of a sadist and a masochist. So, is the warrior a sadist sometimes, and is the warrior a masochist sometimes? Well, yes, it is. And The sadist part of the warrior happens when and if it derives pleasure from inflicting pain and suffering on others. When it derives pleasure, when it engages in aggressive and violent behavior, when it enjoys the feeling of dominance and control of others. Oh, good gracious, do we have this a lot in corporate environment and other business establishment? But do we have this happening at war in within those peacekeepers? When a warrior is at war to keep the peace for me and you so we can sleep better at night, we're not going to go into too much detail. Let's just keep it simple for right now. And when they pull the trigger, even the police officers, where they chase after the perpetrator, where they pull the trigger, in that particular moment, they are a sadist because they engage in an aggressive and violent behavior. They're the warrior nonetheless, but in that particular moment, they are a sadist. I don't believe that they enjoy doing that, but they have to refrain the perpetrator from perpetrating any further. On the other side of the shadow of the warrior lies the masochist. When the warrior inflicts pain upon themselves, whether physically or emotionally, when it's overcritical and punishing towards themselves, and this may lead to the feelings of worthlessness and defeat. Yeah. Let's look at the next archetype. The next archetype, good archetype, is the rebel. The rebel represents qualities of non-conformities, independence, and desire for change. It's a symbol of courage, just like the warrior. It's a symbol of courage and defiance against oppressive systems and outdated norms. It challenges the status quo. Why are things like this and how can they be better? And advocates for social, political, and personal transformation. Now, this sounds very much like a therapist, doesn't it? On the shadow aspect of the rebel, we have the tyrant and the conformist. When in behaving as a tyrant, a rebel seeks to rebel for the sake of power and control. We are seeing a lot of rebellion for the sake of power and control happening in the past many years. And in the role of a tyrant, but we also see a lot of behavior at a global level in a pure form of rebellion as a desire for change to eliminate the tyranny and the rebellion for the sake of power and control. That has been happening, and it's clearly visible at the global level. Now, a tyrant also seeks to be authoritarian and oppressing others, yeah, and imposes their own agenda and suppresses disagreement. That very well happens in the corporate level, or it happens anytime you have a boss, because a boss will impose their own agenda into you and will suppress disagreement because there is a job to do. Now, is that a bad tyrant in that situation? No, it's not a bad tyrant because you have a job to do, and the boss is very well aligned with the scope and the purpose of the business and the tasks that need to be completed. Yeah. The conformist, a shadow of the rebel, will conform to any rebellious ideologies of movements. And we have seen that happening even in US of A in the past couple of years, have we not? And the conformists will conform without critically examining their values or their implication. They do not challenge the status quo of the rebellion. They will just rebel for the purpose of belonging to that ideology or that particular movement. And they will blindly follow a rebellious group or individual, sacrificing their own critical thinking and their values in the process. So we need to keep that in mind when we rebel against the right thing, against the healthy thing, keeping the greater good in mind. Make sure not to become a tyrant and not to become a conformist when there is no need to. The other archetype, the archetype is the caregiver. We have a lot of parents. Again, we have a lot of therapists. We have educators. We have doctors. We have police officers. We have firefighters. We have lots and lots of different what's the word they want to use, occupation that seek to keep the peace so me and you can sleep well at night. And this caregiver represents compassion, nurturing, selflessness, and generosity. It's a symbol of support and care for the others. It's empathetic. It's willing to lend a helping hand and provides comfort and assistance to those in need. The shadow aspect of the caregiver are the martyr and the controller. So when we are a caregiver, we ought to keep in mind to not become the martyr and to not become a controller. Now, a martyr would sacrifice their own well-being and happiness for the sake of others, very much similar to the conformist to some degree, isn't it? And very much similar to the masochist of the warrior. Are they not? They are. And a martyr would neglect their own needs and boundaries. So keep that in mind. And he has a feeling, a sense of duty to constantly care for others, even at their own expense. Now, parents and mothers, especially mothers, they do that all the time, all the time, all the time. So what we want to take out of this, that when we constantly care for others at our own expense, we need to remember that giving care and being a caregiver does not mean to become a doormat and forget about ourselves. Does not mean that. Now, on the other hand, the other shadow of the caregiver is the controller, where the controller has a need for excessive control over others' lives, what they're doing, over their well-being. They are overbearing and they are intrusive. And they believe they know what is best for others. Yeah. Well, sometimes they do, but not all the times. I mean, a doctor will know better if you need surgery or what treatment to have, because that's their particular area of expertise. And other professions like that, but not, okay, I'm not going to go this direction. And a controller would also insist on making decisions on others' behalf. So if you are to take this to a doctor, the doctor will not tell you what to do. The doctor will give you the options of what's available to you and what are the risks and the benefits of the decision that you take. And the controller also leads to a lack of autonomy and independence in those they care for. So as a caregiver, we want to be aware of the shadow of the martyr and the controller, which we do not want to be. Now, we don't want to take this information and project it onto others and start telling others that, look, what a controlling you are with me, because at work, your boss, it's supposed to tell you what to do, maybe not how to a large degree, but it's supposed to monitor your tasks. As a parent has a good amount of control over you as a child because you haven't developed enough wisdom and you don't know how to go about life just yet up until you get to earn your own income and become independent. So it's just part of life. It doesn't mean that that is a controlling situation. Now, as a practitioner, because of this archetypes and because of the shadow, and I chose these three particular archetypes because they are so closely related to a practitioner. And every practitioner needs to heal and individuate because they need to deepen the insight into the human psyche, into the human behavior and emotions. And they also need to align with their soul purpose. There is no individuation and there is no arriving at the self if you don't address the anima animus, otherwise known as the soul and the sacred. Yeah, it's not fufu, it's not voodoo, it's none of that. Soul is important. Now, different people and different professions and different ideologies address the self, the soul differently. So you can choose the one that better suits your ideology and is more aligned with your values and beliefs. And see if it uplifts you as opposed to criticizing and take you down. Because when a profession and an ideology keeps on criticizing you, that doesn't bring you closer to the soul. Yeah, any work with the soul will uplift you. Yeah, and enhance you, expand you. Yeah. Also, a practitioner needs to gain valuable tools for helping their clients to explore their inner world. And a lot of practitioners work with the soul and the sacred, and if they don't, well, some of the practitioners, not all of it. Hypnotherapy happens to automatically work with the self, whether directly or indirectly. Now, all of the hypnotherapists, no. Some of them, yes. Gaining valuable tools as a practitioner helps to navigate complex emotion for personal growth and for healings. And when it comes to applying the tools, a practitioner needs to become a more active agent of change. Yeah? Change, help the client change, help themselves change. Individuation has requirements. It doesn't just fall from the sky, does it? No, it doesn't. So it requires to do shadow work, because if the shadow is repressed and isolated from consciousness, which often it is, it never gets corrected and is liable to burst forth suddenly. You know, when you snap, which is, I had enough, and you snap and close doors and you're upset, that's your shadow bursting. So shadow work is required for you to individuate, otherwise known as self-actualize, otherwise known as becoming the best version that you can be, and so many other terminology. Stepping into your life purpose and so many other terminology. Individuation also requires to balance the anima animus, to balance your soul through the sacred and the sacred with your soul. Now, again, sacred does not mean religion. Although it's used a lot with religious purposes, the sacred comes from the Latin word sacre, which means created, that which has been created, that which creates. Yeah. So let's keep that in mind. The sacred, not religion. Sacred is that which creates. Yeah. And individuation also requires subconscious alignment. Your subconscious mind is in alignment on all layers of the mind. Well, layers of the mind are complex and there are many. And that requires you to do and be the behavior, not just do. It requires a beingness. Yeah, the mind is not just logical mind, is not just rational mind. The layers of the mind, some of the layers of the mind are identities, values, beliefs, potential, results, behavior, and so on. Now, individuation will happen very smoothly and effortlessly through generating states of being. Now, generating states of being through fearfulness weaves hypnotherapy, psychology, shamanism, and alchemy all together and offers archetypes as tools for embodiment. As I stated earlier, archetypes, there are many, many archetypes. I have at least 320 archetypes based on Carl Jung's work, but there are many archetypes, and we can now create many archetypes to be able to generate states of being. And generate states of being can be simple or very complex, dynamic states of being, and help you radiate yourself as opposed to projecting your shadow. It implies being more versus doing, otherwise known as walking the talk as opposed to just talking the talk. And it requires sharp, detached observational skills, especially in this fast moving world we are experiencing today. Now, the sharp, detached observational skill involves higher mind, a lot of layers of the higher mind, and it helps you connect to the source of creation, to your soul path, and to your soul purpose. Slowly, through steps, eventually you will arrive through that. And through this working on detached observational skill, your shadow will begin to heal, resolve itself, because by observing your tendencies and your shortcomings and everything that infuriates you and everything that bothers you so deeply, only by observing, when you observe, you don't make decisions, you don't like or dislike, you observe, right? Attention, focus, concentration, make decisions at all different aspects. Observation, attention, focus, concentration, observation for different aspects. Focusing and concentration require you to make a decision. Sometimes you like it or dislike it. Attention, again, as attention is a built-in mechanism. But attention allocation, again, becomes a choice, and you might like it or dislike it. But observation is none of that. You simply observe and make no decision or evaluation of what is there. And because of this detached observational skill, the shadow will begin to just dissipate all by itself. You don't have to specifically work hard at it. Yeah? Now, fearfulness provides a very comprehensive skill set through the thought healing practices, in addition to this detached observational skills, and takes you into archetypal experiences where you begin to alchemize experiences. Now, the self, I touched up on it many times. Every human has a unique interpretation of reality. They're pretty much, this is the archetype of internal representation of reality, where we all have a belief system, a value system, we have habits, routines, memories, expectation, attitudes. Then we have a way to which we sort information, we make decisions, the way we use our language, and all of the meta programs that develop consciously or begin to run on an autopilot influence all of these lower levels, and also influence the filters to which we generalize, um, I'm clicking through things here, sort, or make decisions. All of this are interconnected, and they move in a type of a circle, which affects your behavior, which affects your results, affects your life experiences and your existential dimension and your expanded awareness, moving circular and throughout in this particular format. All right. So that's the contact information, and that's that. So, Randy, you want to touch up on something? Any questions?
No, it's a lot of material. Any particular recommendations we want to learn more?
Yeah, you always come with a lot of wisdom. Some of the best reading recommendation, which I don't have it on the screen right now. I don't know where is this background noise coming in from. But some of the reading recommendation that I can offer right now would be the Fearfulness book, which is available on my site. And let me see if I can bring that over. And as I bring that over, maybe Randy can go over a few things up until I bring over something. Randy, can you take over a few seconds? Oops.
The only thing that I know, I don't know about quality much. Please reply if you're not. Signal Forge, I've read very much in that. Carl Jung, for what I know about him, is a disciple of Sigmund Freud, way back at the last year. We're kind of falling out of percent. I think he's not. what's the phrase you use? The subconsciously mental block. The subconscious of all community. Anyway, I think they have falling out on that training. But he went on and did his own thing, which is a lot different than traditional psychoanalysis, which has nothing to do with archetypes. It's everything to do with internal things like ego, superego, various desires and motives that a lot of them are unconscious. It's late in the evening and going by psychological. What's the complex of Freud? I'm having totally. Anyway, so, yeah.
Okay, and here's the more reading that Randy suggested that we can do. Feelfulness is a book. It's the book I wrote. It took a lot of years to put this book together. It's very comprehensive work that helps you arrive at the self in a very smooth process. It teaches you how to feel a feeling by choice and generate states of being. And as practitioners, and we are required to generate states of being and make those states available to the client to enhance a client experience. And thus it helps us avoid transference, that emotional contagion, and keeps us from burnout, because burnout is very common with therapists. So Feelfulness is available on my website right now, creatingis.org and feelfulness.org, and is a very good read. It has plenty of a little bit of history as to what, so you get to understand how feel a feeling by choice is not all that new, why is required, and generating states of being has been practiced since the age of humanity, and is not as complicated. But mostly feel a feeling by choice is important because everybody tells you to feel a feeling, but nobody teaches you how. So thank you very much for the idea, but how do I do it? So I happen to stumble upon some techniques on how to feel a feeling by choice, and I find it to be extremely liberating. And after I thought a bunch of people over the years this with the thought feeling practices, get a thought, practice it with a feeling, and then work with that. And after I saw the results that other people will get from this, I decided that this book needs to be written, and the book is out, available on both my websites. And enjoy the book. Any questions, let me know, and we will take it from there. Randy?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, so that is that is it for the self, Jungian aspects of the self. Thank you. There's some background noise. I don't know where that's coming from. Thank you. Let me know any questions. All right, that's a lot of background noise. Thank you. Let me know any questions, and we will see you